Well, welcome everybody to the Audit Committee meeting of the Central Hawke's Bay District Council, 8th of August. My name is Andrew Gibbs. I'm the new chair, and Michael is also joining us. Would you like to introduce yourself?
Yeah, Mike Timmer. I'm got a background in local government, and just joined the chair, joined this committee. So I'm very pleased to be able to help.
And our profiles are on the website for those who want to know more. But welcome, Mayor, and welcome, councillors. Would you like to do it?
Absolutely. Welcome everybody. Welcome to this meeting. We will use our usual karakia. Whakataka te hau ki te uru, whakataka te hau ki te tonga. Kia mā kina ki uta, kia mā taratara ki tai. E hi aki ana te atakura, he tio, he huka, he hauhu, te hei, mauri ora. Thank you. And I welcome to our new independent chair and members. It's a pleasure to have you on board. Good luck.
Yeah. Luck is nothing. And welcome to those who may be online. And I'd like to also just extend a thank you to, on behalf of Mike and I, around the induction process you ran us through. It was very enlightening, I have to admit, and really enjoyed the frankness and the openness that you showed and the insights that you provided. You know, there's a lot going on in this big area. So, yeah, looking forward to the support we can get through this committee. Right, so now let's move through to apologies. We have an apology from Councillor Aitken, and we have a short apology from Councillor Minahan, who'll be joining us later in the morning on Zoom. Correct? Can I have a seconder, a mover and a seconder? Yeah, please. Yeah, thank you, Michael. Thank you. Okay. In terms of any declarations of conflict of interest, does anybody want to declare a conflict of interest for today? This Michael?
I'm a director on Whanganui District Council. I think you have too much interaction. I think you've got your insurances that can crossovers with that, but that's about the only thing I can think of.
Yeah, and noting through you, Mr. Chair, so for the other members, so both new members have done an internal conflict of interest declaration, which I've reviewed and signed off on, so that's held.
Thank you very much. Through to standing orders. The recommendation is that following standing orders are suspended for the duration of the meeting. That's 21.2, time limits on speakers. 21.5, members may speak only once, and 21.6, limits on the number of speakers. And then option C under section 22, general procedures for speaking and moving motions are used for the meeting. Standing orders are recommended to be suspended to enable members to engage in a discussion in a free and frank manner. Move. Yes, second. Thank you very much. Righty ho. Now let's move through to the minutes of the previous meeting. They're in our pack there. For those of you who are in attendance, Michael and I clearly wish. So any discussion on minutes?
No, I'm happy.
We're happy? Yeah. Right. The recommendations of the minutes of the Insurance Committee held on the 20th of June 24 and circulated in
Sorry, Councillor Minahan, have you got?
Welcome.
All go.
Morning.
Morning.
We've just approved the minutes, so that's where we're up to.
Very good.
Thank you very much. Right, so let's move through to the reporting sections. So we have the resolution and action monitoring report. Over to you, Doug.
Right, thank you, Mr. Chair. So this is our normal resolution monitoring report and our action monitoring report. So just the one resolution there that's on track. And again, we've got a session today and workshop on insurance. We've got Mr. Palmer coming in to give us some feedback and advice on the insurance strategy work and our current approach to insurance. And then just looking down what are the three actions there as well, just noting that two of them I'll call them complete, Noting that again on insurance, we've got a further action on that we're going to talk about today. And again, there's a further note on the review of the Treasury management policy relating to property investment. So again, that's in the work program scheduled for later this year. So happy to take any questions.
Just a question on the insurance strategy. Is that finalised or is it still some work to be done on it? Because I saw it in the last document. Not sure whether it's finalised.
Yeah, so through you, Mr. Chair, so still sitting as draft, and again, the aim will be for today's workshop session is to have some feedback from Mr. Palmer about how we can look to try and finalise that and any other kind of actions. Certainly been a work in progress.
So I just want to pick up on the second page at the top that talks about the Three Waters work and the risks to the business. And I just wanted to pick up on, I think probably a nuance that's not quite articulated there, which is the, and I think this is where Councillor Aitken raises this issue, is not the risk of the Three Waters program per se, but actually what that means to the residual business left behind. If we move to the aggregated Three Waters entity, and I don't know whether we add or change the commentary on that particular line, but I think it is an important one that perhaps risk and assurance could be the keeper of that lens right through this process over the coming few months. So on the Hawke's Bay Three Waters work, we're going to be receiving, there's a program of work running out between the councils. We're going to be receiving updates on that. We're going to be receiving modelling of numbers around what a successful CCO kind of entity would look like. I think we need to maybe think what's the lens that we hold, as well as what's the risk of doing that. Also, what's the risk left behind for us as a business entity as well. And I think that's the piece, maybe the nuance that's not quite captured in that line.
Would be a scope of work include a section on the impact on Central Hawke's Bay District Council? Would that be logical? For us, it'll be different for each of the bodies that join the waters, wouldn't it?
Yeah, no, it will be, and the risk profile will be for everybody. Part of the PE item we've got this afternoon, recognising this PE is about where we've gone through ZLT and done a reassessment of some of the emerging risks, recognising that when we get our risk status report, that's already kind of 6 months old. So from memory, kind of that change in waters and how that's approached is certainly this committee is going to need to put a greater lens over as we, based on the current work program, are aiming to have something out to community to be consulting on in terms of a local delivery plan for kind of early next year. So certainly as we unpack that program, there's going to need to be some very careful consideration to not just risk relating to water, but the residual risk that remains for the organisation. So excellent work on that. When you think that's through
for the council to make a decision to give up those assets, we have to have a risk outcome. The operational risk will exist the next day. Nothing would have changed, right? And so it's we've got to have confidence that in a shorter period of time these risks get managed. Otherwise, would stay with us, right? And so those criteria need to be very clear, articulated about how we would go through a decision making. Or not.
So in the current program, that's some early business case work. Recognise there's a whole lot of work that's previously been done on what was the model. And again, it's really the key program of work at the moment is refreshing a large part of that business case, and just recognising that the context for every council has changed as well. So certainly, there's certainly more work to be done. What's fully personal, but the flip side of that too is also the risk profile that we have without it. So
that's the baseline, right?
Yeah, totally.
I understand that pretty well now. Just quite good.
We're going to talk about that, and yeah, that's fine, because it's to me one of the biggest risks is the residual. What do you do after the business is gone? How you deal with it.
Yeah, and I think that's the topic that has potentially been raised, but is maybe not quite covered in that line in that report. Yeah. Well, it's probably even bigger than that, and I think that's where we haven't probably quite got our heads around what is it we would need to do. Yeah.
Stranded overhead.
Yeah.
Councillor Minor, put your hand up if you want to ask questions or sing out. Just
I have,
Yeah, good on you. Okay,
just
so
an-
very good point, Matt. So
I think it's got a question, sorry, councillor?
yes, we're still on the risk report, correct?
we are
Resolution report.
resolution report.
Oh, no, sorry. The next one, I've got question next one, sorry.
No problem at all. Any other discussions or questions?
Just a question on the treasury management policy. You've done some reviews of it. Does that not get reviewed every triennium? And I'm just wondering why you're doing it right now. How does that all fit in?
So that was reviewed as part of the 3-year plan, and there was an outstanding action we are coming back specifically to investment property. So it's quite like we don't hold any technical investment properties. It was pretty silent on that. So if anything, it was more working through, well, what are the options to give more clarity around if we were to hold investment properties, what would be the rationale? How would we treat that? So again, that's been programmed in the work program for later this year to come back and revisit that.
Right. Yeah, because there's a section that I noticed that a lot of councils in New Zealand haven't got in their treasury and risk management policy around review of investments that could probably be put in the policy at some point in the future when you do it next time, which I can tell you about at some point.
Questions? The recommendation is that we that the report be noted. Are we? Right.
Yes.
Very good. Thank you for that. So we now move through to the risk status report. All right.
Good morning to the committee, and in particular, welcome to our new chair and independent member. So before you this morning is the risk status report, and similar to the briefing that I gave you during the induction, I'll just run you through some of the background just for the benefit of this meeting, and then take you through the latest information in the report. So the report in its current form came from our risk maturity review that was undertaken at the back end of 2023. There are a number of recommendations as part of the risk maturity review. At a high level, the key recommendations were to bring the risk discussion into focus in a CHB context, to look at the risk appetite of the full council table, and then to only in this meeting discuss the risks that don't sit within the risk appetite as described by the elected members. So it focuses the report in terms of what is top of mind, our top risks for the business, and it allows that discussion to be focused in our Central Hawke's Bay context. So for this report, it is largely unchanged just from the last quarter, given that there's a short turnaround. There was only a 2-month reporting period in the cycle. So there's a couple of comments which I'll run you through. The committee will see that a lot of the comments that you might have seen last time have been removed because the risk has moved back into the appetite, given that the mitigations that have been put in place, it's reduced the risk back down or the situation's changed. And also of note, in the later discussion that we'll have in this meeting, that the executive team has reviewed the top risks. So that's mentioned in the report, and we'll take you through that in more detail later in the meeting. So if I just take you through the attachment. I'll only talk about those risks where there's comments against them. So the first one, the council loses or reduces its credibility with the Porere Beach resilience. So the briefing has been provided to the full council table with where we're at with this particular topic, and the action there that we're having ongoing discussions with Tūmata Arawai and planned community engagement. The next one where there's comments is the rate increases are above the forecasted levels. That risk remains in amber. We've recently been through striking the rates as part of the new 3-year plan. That happened in July, and all of our customers have been notified with the new rates charges that have come through. If we go through to strong communities, you'll note there's no comment, but just following feedback that we've split out the health and safety risk. It was previously combined where we had both the risk to council staff and risk to public in one. That's been separated. And then through into the last couple of pages where we move into assets. So within critical asset failure, the Tikakino Road drinking water plant, the risk of flooding there, the action being that officers are continuing to work with government officials on funding options for that site to relocate the pump, the drinking water plant out of the flood zone. The State Highway 2 Borefield, some really good progress there. Actually, that's probably the main change in this report, that our officers have completed a successful upgrade of one pump, and there's 2 further pumps to go. But I think that they will be received well, given that risk has been there for a while, and we're starting to see some work progress fairly rapidly for that risk. And then the drinking water resilience for Waipokoro, no new update, but just for the benefit of the new members, that program had been rephased due to affordability as part of the 3-year plan. And the last page, the disruption of essential services. The first 2 I can probably speak to together, in that bridge failures and routes significantly damaged by weather events. Largely these were as a result of Cyclone Gabrielle. And these risks are generally trending down because we are a good way through the work program, and as bridges are opened or roads are repaired, that risk reduces. However, there's still a long program ahead of us and the funding uncertainty that relates to that. And the last risk there, the road asset damage due to weather, separate to the post-cyclone damage, that is the existing damage to our roading network that existed from many wet winters previously, and noting that that's a risk to our network. So happy to take any questions. If there's any specific discussion on risks, I have the rest of the exec team sitting behind me, and they'll be happy to jump up and answer anything.
Very much. Any discussion? Yes, Councillor Minor.
Yes, thank you, Chair. My area of concern, well, I don't know what it is really, but it's regarding the cybersecurity interruption. And we just saw recently that we had America had a software update released by CrowdStrike, which caused outages affecting Microsoft operating systems throughout New Zealand to crash. So my question was, are we comfortable as a council that we have effective current controls in place in managing or mitigating this type of future risk?
So through you, Chair, thank you, Councillor Moynihan. So the cybersecurity report that comes to the Risk and Assurance Committee, we had Ms. Blair report recently to the Risk and Assurance Committee on the work program specifically for the risk of cybersecurity events. Most recently, you're right, Councillor Moynihan, there was an international outage, and we've also had an event recently. Those 2 events we've taken learnings from, but I am as comfortable as I can be uncomfortable with this risk, that we have a very clear work program ahead of us with 2 particular pieces of technology that, because of those events, we've brought them forward and we're implementing them. So they introduce a range of controls for us that we don't currently have, either software-based or externally, where we have the name is escaping me, but the National Office in Wellington that deals with cybersecurity, having them as part of our incident management team. We're also reviewing the contract that we have with the Hastings District Council, Councillor Moynihan, where they provide IT support to us, and firming that up as part of the agreement where they provide cybersecurity assistance like they have with both of these events. So there's a number of things in the work program that does get reported to this committee, and I am comfortable at this present point in time that we're progressing and have accelerated that work program in light of the recent events.
Thank you.
Mine's in relation to the adoption of the 3-year plan. Just wondering, and it might be for Mr. Chamberlain actually, whether we've had an increase in ratepayers contacting the rating officers and talking about remissions or rebates, or the fact that they're going to have to default on their rate. And how do we build defaults into our financing plans?
Yeah, so through you, Chair. To date, the first instalment notice has gone out. We, in terms of interactions with our rating team, fairly similar levels to previous years. We haven't seen the level of noise that we've perhaps seen in social media. We have been running a number of rate rebate sessions in libraries and at Age Concern, and we've certainly had a very large uptake in terms of rate rebates, which obviously helps part pay some of the rates. The actual first rates instalment isn't due until the 20th of this month. So it's a little bit early to see whether the level of payment is going to be in line with previous years, but certainly not hearing quite the level of noise that I expected, given the increase that we've had this year.
I just got, I haven't got any questions about the risk per se, because I'm not detail enough about the organisation to comment on them. My questions are more around the process and how the risk is presented, the whole thing around that, which is probably best to talk about offline, and how I think we could make some improvements, or some how I see the world, which may not be how everyone else does, but might be useful. In terms of the cyber comment, I'd just like to take that a little bit further. I'd kind of like to get the report. You did refer to a report that's done. I'd kind of like to read that. And just one question I have is, I noticed it in another organisation, is do you have two-factor authentication? You've got that installed? That's right.
Funnily enough, my questions were a little bit about process too, about the trigger mechanisms of where the risks are sitting on this list compared to other things. So things like Aquatic Centre 1, that works complete. Like, how does that just not be on the list anymore? Same with the civil defence ones. They're all green, which is cool, but they don't actually align with what Civil Defence Group actually thinks are our biggest natural hazard risks. The ones that are listed. And I wonder in the commentary about the rates increases, but thank you, Councillor Byrne, for raising about that. But I actually wonder whether we need to take the lens forward, as in LTP strike of the rates is going to be what it's going to be now. And actually we need to probably be looking at what's the impact of the annual plan for 24-25 budget, which will, by the end of this calendar year, will be worked through a draft process. So I just wonder whether we need to shift the narrative to be future looking on that one. And hang on. Oh, wastewater, hang on, where have I got to? On page 23 on the environmentally responsible failure to meet regulatory obligations. When we talk about failure to meet wastewater consent conditions with discharge into waterways, and I just want to flag to the committee that maybe this is an area where we need to go back and test council appetite, risk appetite on this one. So it is orange compared to the green of the appetite is of the drinking water one. But we actually made a really active decision in the long-term plan, which was to, even though we've got an environment court order on us on our wastewater compliance, that we actually said we just can't, we just have to accept that that is a thing and we can't move it forward for 3 years. So we've actually taken a really high appetite position on that. And maybe we just need to go back and test that with council.
I'm aware of that position on that.
Councillors.
Communicated back to them saying
Regional council.
And there's a process being worked through internally on that.
So in response to work with us, we want to throw us out.
And probably to Mayor Alex's point, what are the other short-term things for us to work through in conjunction with what are the longer term, having completed HPRC having completed the Apaturi scheme review. What is the reset and the refresh of the existing wastewater strategy in terms of investment profiles and timelines as well. So quite a few moving pieces and.
And so through you, Chair, Mayor Walker, some of your comments were very similar to the discussion that we had with the exec team. And exactly that, the process of when things come on and off, and are those risks still the top risks to the business? And are they described in the way that's relevant? It's only been 6-7 months since we put this together, and it just shows how quickly things have moved. So that's the exact discussion that we'll have, and really welcome your views on what you see the top risks to council being currently.
Yeah, I think it's interesting because the top ones, the real top ones, the top half a dozen are really obvious. It's when you get into 12 to 20 that you go, well, what's the scale of this? That how do you measure the scale of this that actually justifies it to be on the list compared to not on the list? And to be taking time and focus from the organisation.
Well, just got a couple of observations or questions, and we once again, like Mike said, we can probably do some of these in more detail afterwards. But in terms of your cyber strategy, have you also got as part of that all the mobile assets? So we know all the mobile assets we've got and are the cell phones, and so we know what they're all up to date and so it's quite an old fleet.
So through you, Chair, we have a program called ServiceDex Plus, which is our asset management tool for all of our IT hardware. Most of the information is in there in terms of our assets, but there will be some older ones that there is a project to continuously update that. Generally, our hardware is pretty current. We renew generally within a 3 to 5 year period for laptops, probably closer at the 3-year end. And any hardware that's associated has a renewal cycle as well. That's all managed through that software package. And we partner with Hastings District Council to have access to that software. But it was introduced probably in the last 18 months, so it's relatively new to the business. But our renewals were still happening even though we didn't have the system in place. We took active steps within the last 5 years to increase the budget so that we could be keeping on top of technology renewals. And we're in a pretty good spot in my view.
And just going back to Councillor Burns' question around rates, is the concern there around the rates of readers profile that will be as a consequence of the rate increases? We just don't know what that's going to be. Okay.
Maybe just through you, Mr. Chair, again, in the session that we've done as ELT, kind of this looking forward, it's more about it's the longer term affordability issue, and it's the kind of risk at a macro level, and it's now about how do we try, what are the things that we can practically do to try and understand that risk for this community, because it's going to have a number of implications. And it's not, and again, it's the part of the challenges in the profile, not just the impact that we have as a rating institution, but other organisations and other impacts on households. It's just part of the profile of this that we do right now.
Just a final one, just going back to the Tikakino Road water intake area, which we had the opportunity to see in our induction process. We've got an interim solution in there in terms of the stop banks and bits and pieces, but obviously that's not the final desired outcome. As a result of the flood, we've got learnings around how we will, it's going to happen again, right? In the interim until we solve we move the plant up on top. So as a consequence of Gabriel, we've learnt about the recall process and how quick we can turn that around and that sort of stuff. It's well documented that if it did flood again, this is what we need to do. That's all been, we've sort of done that post evaluation, post the event. Is that what we've done in terms of?
I don't know that we've done a formal debrief on necessarily all the lessons. I know that Veolia have done some work in that place because in that space, because they did involve international crews and they've taken some lessons away from it. And what we have got though is some operational learnings that is in part documented. Probably the biggest focus for us though is we are due to understand shortly kind of next steps on funding. To hopefully see the plant relocated, which is where the really big focus is going to go. But just noting in the short term, well, what are those mitigating things? So we'll be good. We'll do some more homework on that.
The trick is it will happen maybe, and it's just about how we get the water back on as quickly as practically possible. That's if there's anything we could learn by reflecting on what happened, you know, we do it differently. Because that's the key mitigation we've got at the moment until we get that up. Okay. Very good. Oh,
Sorry, just further to Mayor Alex's questions earlier, just questioning the settings, particularly on the bridge failure. I think in February we had a report that there was 26 bridges at risk of scour and erosion. Obviously we've been able to fix the most critical, but I'm just wondering whether, I mean, river paths change constantly. How do we monitor? And when I think about the Highway 50 Waipawa River Bridge, which wasn't ours, thankfully, but how do we monitor, and do we know what bridge is the next at risk of being taken out?
To you, Mr. Chair. We carry out regular inspections of our bridges, and particularly post-cyclone. We're very aware of the risk of scouring around the abutments and the piers. So we've got teams that are regularly inspecting them and identifying where the risks are, and then prioritising the work. And some of it is reactive; it needs to be reactive maintenance. Other work is more structured, more planned. So yeah, that's how we're managing it at the moment.
How do we budget for? I mean, it's hard at the moment.
Yeah, it's difficult to budget. It's basically it's a watching game really. It's just kind of utilizing our maintenance budgets to keep on top of it to ensure that we don't lose any critical assets. But I mean, that's the main focus, is ensuring that we don't lose the asset in the first place.
Just a supplementary question. One of the themes that's come through from what we did say to Gabriel is ask the locals about how they see the water react, say, to those local bridges. As part of those inspections, do we chat to the locals and said, well, how did the water go? Have you seen any evidence? Or they're saying, look, hey, the shingle's really built up in the approach to this bridge than it was years ago. Do we get feedback from anybody out of that exercise?
Yeah,
it's one of the key things that's come out from all the stuff from the regional council.
Yeah, Mr. Chair, I think there's an opportunity to engage more with locals, because from the 4 weeks experience I've had working in council, we've had a couple of meetings with local landowners, and it's clear to me that we should be taking that local knowledge more seriously and kind of weaving it into our formal asset management approach. So that's something I think we need to strengthen going forward.
Any other questions on our risk report, status report? If not, the recommendation is that we receive that report. So we're going to move on to that. Yes, thank you very much. All right, hey, thank you very much. Oh, and again, right, health and safety. Just noting that key people are away today. So Nicola, you're stepping into the breach again.
I am indeed. So thank you, Chair. So before you is one of the regular routine reports, which is the health and safety report for the 2-month period since the last meeting. So the purpose of this report is to help elected members undertake their obligations under the Health and Safety Work Act, and it gives visibility into our health and safety work programme. Just again, for the benefit of our new chair and member, to give some background similar to what we went through in induction again. The work program that you see in this report came about from some work that we did about 4 years ago now, called the Gap Analysis Project, where we had an independent assessor come in and look at how we did health and safety across the business in every area. So it was a full gap analysis of what we were doing in some pockets of the business, where we weren't doing it elsewhere, how to get consistency, do the building blocks, get some really basic foundational systems in place. And in that 4-year period, we've progressively put things in place that weren't there, improved in areas. We had a 2-year desktop assessment partway through to see where we were at and were the priorities still in the correct order. And that has led into what we describe as the health and safety work program. So in this report, via Ms. Anand, there's a very comprehensive report attached to it. The key things that she regularly reports on is where we're at with the work program, the critical risk project, which has all of the critical risks that were identified and where we're at with developing each of the standards, whether that's working with the committee and staff or whether it's at the other end where it's being formalised through ELT and being tested along the way. She also reports on lead and lag indicators. So anything where she's proactively working or areas of the business where they're proactively working in the health and safety space, as well as the event reporting that comes both from our council, our staff, and then our main contractors. They have different ways of reporting, but Ms. Anand has been working really hard to get that consistent and get the reporting types consistent, at least across our main contractors, so that it's easily visible for you, so you can compare across contractors. However, I just make mention that the contractor sizes are different. They have different numbers of employees, and you'll get to know them a little bit better as you go through. The piece of work that she regularly highlights, and we continue to see some great work in, is that health and safety partnership in action with the roading contractors. That was an initiative that was developed through the period of post-Cyclone Gabrielle and initiated with the contractors that work in the roading corridor and the risks across different contractors that were the same, and how could they learn from each other through that period. The change in this report is that it's been widened to invite other contractors in, so that's really cool to see that they're getting more people on board. And then the last part of her report, it's just the event reporting that I've previously talked about. That's pretty much it, unless you have some specific questions. I'm happy to answer them as best that I can without Ms. Anand in the room.
Questions? Yes, Councillor Minor.
Thank you, Chair. Just a general question for me. Do we benchmark our health and safety performance against similar councils like us, like our neighbours?
Through you, Chair, not that I'm aware of, no. And I would be keen to have that discussion in a bit more detail in terms of what you would be looking to measure and compare against. But broadly speaking, Councillor Minahan, I have seen work programs through other health and safety reports to risk and assurance committees. So if you looked at Hastings, for example, you'd see similar work come through about their critical risk work program over the last 12 months. So you'd see similar reporting coming through to the committee. In terms of performance, I would need to understand a little bit further about what you might like to see.
Oh, it was just a general, just see if you do compare notes or not, that was all. Thank you, Chair.
No problem, thank you.
Quickly, health and safety's moved on from, 1992. I'm just wondering, wellbeing, can you just describe, what we do for staff wellbeing in the organisation?
Sure. So through you, Chair, this really relevant given we had this question from our new members as well during induction, but a range of initiatives, and that can go right up to all of organisation and down to the individual level. In particular, at the moment, you'll see in this report, the Health and Safety Committee, that's part of their role to drive that at the officer level. And there's a couple of initiatives that they put in place to get engagement from staff and things that we can do to increase wellbeing. In the period that we are being post-Cyclone Gabrielle, I think we've come out of a period where that had been the absolute priority for the business, was supporting our staff through that heightened period, and a number of initiatives put in place at that time in wraparound support. So we individually, if staff needed extra support, there'd be things like our EAP, which is the Employee Assistance Program, would be available, but right up at the level of looking at work and prioritising work, and if things needed to be slowed down as well to support that heightened period, then that's the measures that we've put in place. Generally, at the moment, it's run through Ms Martin and Ms Anand, they're the champions, and then we have buy-in from the committee who collectively work across our staff, and any idea is a great idea, and they generally just run with it.
Probably their big focus at the moment. There's lots of there's simple initiatives that are underway, but it's about that kind of wellbeing maturity again. Is started talking about kind of what are those organisational things we need to be embedding into the future around how we set work programs, ensuring with sustainability we've got the right people and the right capability and the right capacity. So that's what kind of that it's almost that different level of well-being where we've got to try and focus the organisations with. So it's not saying that the small, the super Wednesdays where it's soup in the staff room and people bring along a bowl of their own pot of soup, like they are really important too. But it's that there's that higher level, higher order, kind of organisational well-being as well, which is a really big focus for us as we look into the new 3-year plan program.
Because one of the indicators around that well-being is turnover and extended holiday, taking holidays and bits and pieces and stuff. So we're on that to getting that sort of information. Yeah. And EAP, you haven't got any statistics in the report around how many notifications. I know it's private and all that sort of stuff, but do we keep something monitoring activity that's going through that, and do they provide you general feedback on it without identifying specific cases, but is there they reviewing those and saying, look, hey, you've seriously got an issue here, we've got people now have come to us for these specific reasons?
So through you, Chair, they do report at a high level just how many people have come through and perhaps in a body of the business that they might work for. If there were any trends identified, I think that they would. However, the EAP service that we provide is 100% confidential for the employee that goes to it. But there are cases where we might work hand in hand with the employee and we might suggest that that's a good part of their wellbeing, that it's something we work on with them together. In terms of raising issues and trends, they could, but it's not something that we've had happen in the past. So it's all been individual specific actions for those people.
It's been through a process for the other organisation we were in services. There's actually 3 or 4 providers out there now, and it's matured a lot, which is fantastic. And so we can take this offline. I'm really impressed with the capability that's coming through in the market now. So earlier on, you might have only 1 or 2. Now there's 4 or 5 of them.
And maybe just to kind of build on that, like probably the approach we have is a lot. I'll use the word integrated probably, and while there's the opportunity that staff might just go directly to EAP, probably what generally happens is the conversation internally first. And again, people have got the opportunity to go directly to EAP, but it's just one of the service providers that we've got with. It's not always just EAP; it might be another service that's appropriate. And at that kind of highest order level, if there are, the relationship that I have with our people and capability manager, that it's the briefing that I get at the highest order level of things that are emerging. They don't necessarily get shared with all of ELT. But if there are emerging themes or trends, that's usually a discussion that will back the wider ELT.
And through you, Chair, it's not necessarily something we hear from EAP. It's more something we hear from our own teams. If we're noticing a trend and we have that discussion about our people internally, we generally know most of it. Yeah, that they've told us. Most of our people are really open, like if there's something going on, they're talking about it, particularly with the people and capability team.
I want to ask about traffic management and transport corridor risk. And so I know that you're doing that work with the contractors directly in this space, but there's potentially an alignment here with the changes to the risk-based traffic management approach. And just want to make sure that we're thinking about connecting that work you're doing on critical risk for those working in the transport corridor with how a public interface and efficiency frame might drive a change in traffic management approach, and to make sure that we're kind of not talking about those 2 things in silos, that actually are joining together with health and safety of the staff first. So can you talk to me about whether there's any of those conversations happening about changes to the traffic management approach that connect through health and safety? Is there any connections?
To you, Mr. Chair, it's pretty early days at the moment. The Transport Agency are working through, what that risk-based approach looks like. It does feel like there's an opportunity to make those connections in terms of how we roll that out in our community. Something that's clear to me is that, you know, our low volume roading network lends itself to a risk-based approach. And I think so we can sense what I would say sensibly size traffic management, which will also, it should also be beneficial from a cost perspective as well, because traffic management costs are a significant component in our physical works. But I've not been in the discussion before I left the agency around that connection, you know, between public and but it's certainly come from a minister's perception and public perception that we've got far too much traffic management on our network and it doesn't get managed appropriately.
I just would be quite keen for us to make sure we continue to make that decision, because if you connect up the lead and lag metrics in here around identifying the contractors identifying issues in the transport corridor connected to actually the reporting of issues in the transport corridor from an employee perspective, to make sure that we're sense checking any moves that we might make in that efficiency around traffic management back to that. Because I think what most people miss the point on the traffic management is that it seems to have kind of got over the top, but actually at the heart of it was about protecting the workers on the road corridor. But it's kind of morphed into this protecting idiots from being idiots in the road corridor. And actually, what's the balance of protecting the contractors compared to actually how people should just legally drive on the road? So I just want to make sure that we continue to make that connection so that we protect the worker space and we use the data that we're collecting to inform that, and not just public hype or public hype about efficiency, that actually there's still that health and safety at workspace in it.
So, yeah, through you, Mr. Chair, just an additional comments that, I mean, it's the safety of the workers is the main concern.
Yeah.
Because we know there are people who drive on our network that don't comply and sometimes they behave in a real, you know, really badly. So ultimately we do have to ensure that we're looking at that from a primary concern.
Yeah.
Any other questions? Councillor Minor, you got a question?
Oh, I was going to, it was sort of related to the mayor's one, which was about traffic management, so it was actually quite well done. But mine was just, are we aware of any upcoming changes to the health and safety regulations from central government that might impact us? I'm saying that because they were sort of hinting this traffic management's a bit out of control, and there must be ways that we could look at to sort of downsize it, less cones, etc. So I was very similar to the mayor's question, actually. But is there any, are we aware of any more changes coming through that might impact us in that area, in the health and safety area?
Yeah, so probably just notably, we've talked, councillor, just before about the change from the code of practice to risk-based temporary traffic management. So that's probably the most notable one, but nothing that's being out and loud and clear in terms of direction of change in terms of health and safety legislation yet. So
yeah, okay.
No, the only thing I'm aware of is the period of the project. You know, these projects are undertaken and they take 6 or 8 weeks because they've only been half staffed. If you can actually cut it back to 3 weeks, because it's fully staffed, you start and finish the job really quickly. You've got 3 weeks of less risk, right? Because you don't have those people on the road. It was just actually looking at how can they productively increase and turn a project around so you don't have any traffic management until the job's done. That was one of the key indicators they were looking at, is why are things taking so long, which is the point you're making in your long one. So that's any other questions on risk, health and safety? One question I just had, sorry, you're gonna...
Mr. Chair, just on that comment, there's just from my experience in the transport agency, there is an increased move towards closing roads to do work. By doing that, you're removing the people from you're removing the risk altogether. But what it also enables is the projects generally they can be done quicker, and the quality is better as well because they've got the whole site to themselves. So you don't get this piecemeal approach to construction. I, I'd encourage council to kind of think about that and where can we apply that approach? Because I think there are some kind of wins in terms of cost and quality.
It's got a final observation from me. The work on your contractors, has been very good in terms of trying to get them to consistently. I know the forestry people struggle with this as well in terms of. One question we might want to do is often contractors will get independent reviews done of their own work by third parties, and sometimes they're willing to share that with us, and sometimes they're not. So it'd be good just to find out, what other independent checks do they get from their third parties around their own systems and processes and the learnings around that, and hopefully they will be accommodating and sharing those with us in terms of so we get a better understanding. So it's just another exercise they do for their own purposes that actually show some insights into how they're getting on. So it's all we're all part of the same family in this. It's all about learning, right? And so hopefully they'll share those. So interesting to know if they've got some.
Through you, Chair, I can certainly ask. I'm not aware of any off the top of my head.
Righty ho. Any other questions on that? On health and safety? If not, recommendation is that so we thanks Vern. Yeah, second mover, thank you. Right. Okay. Very well. Right, no, we're now up to the Treasury Management Monitoring Report. And Brent, thank you.
Good morning, chairs and councillors. So this report that you've got in front of you covers our treasury management over the end of our financial year. It shows that we finished our financial year with 6.8 million in the bank and 44 million of externally drawn debt. This is only 2 million up from the same time last year. There was no new debt drawn during the period of this report, but what this report does indicate is that post-balance date, we've had some refinancing and some further 4 million of new debt drawn, and this is shown in the table at the bottom of page 41. Council has recently adopted its 3-year plan, and this indicates a significant forward program of capital work. This will then obviously lead to an increasing debt profile. This is shown in the graph on page 42, and the blue bars are the increasing debt profile, assuming that we deliver the works in the 3-year plan. Officers are working with the other councils, as Mayor Alex has already mentioned, on developing a business case for Hawke's Bay Water. Should this business case be successful and council move to that type of arrangement and the debt passed over for the water, the debt profile changes significantly and is indicated by the orange bars in the same graph. The graph at the top of page 44 shows our debt profile and our fixed and maximum fixed debt arrangements under our treasury management policy. This shows that council is running at minimums and is either at minimum or just below minimum, depending on which year you look at. And this has been a purposeful decision between officers and our treasury advisors for 2 main reasons. One is to take advantage of expected interest rate falls, and also because of the uncertainty of the timing of possible debt transfers, both under the previous Labor model and under Hawke's Bay Water potentially with the new national Water Done Well scheme. You'll see there that there's some commentary across pages 44 and 45 about the wholesale interest rate markets. The wholesale markets are forecasting and reacting in advance of the Reserve Bank and are already showing signs of interest rate drops. And some of the forward swaps are getting very competitive, and council officers are working with Bancorp, our treasury advisors, to take advantage of those. So I'll take the rest of the report as read, but those are probably the highlights. Happy to take questions.
Discussion.
You just got a few questions. It's probably about how things are presented more than anything else. Just looking on page 40, you give the maturity of the investments there. I wonder what the importance of that is. LGFA notes are, in my experience, are nothing. I don't think there's been any secondary market trading in LGFA notes. So to me, they're a bit of an evil that you have to put up with, and I don't see any reason that you should report on those other than the lump. The chart you've got there with all the notes all nicely put out, it's great, but really I don't think it adds a lot to the report. It just adds a lot of volume. It's not really any use to me anyway. The other thing that I had was on page 44, we would appear to be in breach of our fixed floating cover. Is that correct?
It is when you and looking at some of the outer years, so
Yeah.
just before 2026 and again just before 2028.
Yeah.
We are.
Yeah, you just haven't highlighted that in the report. And I sort of get why it is, because there's a lot of uncertainty with the three waters and stuff. And but yeah, it's just I just think it was a little misleading that you didn't put that in there. It was good to see that you've now got a the forward swap curve in there. I think that's useful in terms of, well, seeing where things are going in the future in terms of how when you make decisions with Bancorp in terms of when you're going to do your fixed coverage. Apart from that, no, thank you very much for the report.
I just had one question. There's a applied assumption here that if we get rid of water assets, a chunk of debt goes with it. What would you arrive at portion of debt that we've currently got, and how would you work out what part goes? I know you probably favour to get as much rid of it as practically possible, but
Yeah, so every year as part of our annual report, we have a table in there that breaks down our debt. And when we draw debt, we allocate it to different projects. So I can show you in our annual report that 85% of our external debt is water related. So if and when council transfers that debt, it'll lose 85% of its debt, but it'll lose about 35% of its revenue. So it quite significantly changes the debt to revenue profile of council.
Just on that, do you run an internal debt? You have internal debt registers. Is that how you do it?
Yep.
So that's it. Andrew, that's just it's real easy for them to determine. They know exactly the projects and easily discovered. Yeah.
So again, going back to the previous Labor model, when we were working through the transition unit signed off on the debt book that we're showing in our annual report, and we're happy to accept that.
next question. Okay.
So the only issue really is how you translate that internal debt to external debt, because what you'll have is 85 million, but the question is, well, you've got a whole lot of fixed rate debt here and floating rate debt. The floating rate debt's fine because it's floating, right? With the fixed rate debt, it's going to be a bit of a little bit of argument as to what belongs to water and what belongs to the council.
Correct.
If it's out of the money, it belongs to water, and if it's not, it belongs to this council. Will be your way, our way of looking at it. But the other water people might have another way of looking at it.
So that was exactly one of the issues that we were working through with the previous NTU, and it was decided that the most pragmatic solution was to just prorata it. If 85% of your water, 85% of your debt was water, then 85% of the fixed and 85% of the floating transferred to the new.
That obviously includes your interest rate swaps as well.
Correct.
And are they going to be novated or how's that? Are they just going to be cancelled and marked to market and then you have a square up? Is that how it would work?
It's too early to tell for the Hawke's Bay water model because we haven't worked through that level of detail. But the way that the transition unit, we're going to do it under the old regime. They were going to run them to completion and basically reimburse council for the over or unders, depending on how it played out.
Also a ring fence pool of funding under the old model. It's called No Worse Off. And some of that was associated with how you would cover some of those challenges as well in terms of debt coverage. So there are going to be all the things as we work through certainly the new Hawke's Bay model. We have debt transfer timing, residual.
But not just debt transfer though, but asset transfer and the consistency evaluation of assets. So we're going to transfer debt, we're going to transfer assets as well. So there's a whole piece of work there, which is doesn't have all the detail on there.
So one of the plans for the group of 4 Hawke's Bay councils is that we will get a single valuer to come and value every council's assets using the same methodology, using the same life expectancies, using the same valuation per unit, so that we're comparing apples with apples as part of developing the business case.
With that change, it's still not decided, but it's still pending. Is that influencing the way fund water assets in England?
So at the moment, where the 3-year plan was written on the assumption that assets and water remained with council and we just carried on as business as usual. And then we'll deal with the transition should the decision be made at a later date to stand up 3 waters, Hawke's Bay waters.
And certainly the advice from like Bancorp, all those things have been sort of, what are the best swaps in the short term? It's all those factors that they consider the advice that we receive from Treasury advisors too. So.
The stake was put in the ground under the old system, and we're now obviously still investing our water assets in the interim. That's all 100% debt loaded. And people go, there's 100% rate funded. An outcomes rate. So
Currently, the majority of our capital improvement program, which is what's driving the forward debt, is loan funded.
it's when you look out to the outer years, it's eye-watering, isn't it? In terms of that debt loading, there's no asset value profile, obviously, that goes with it, but it's saw that.
It's huge.
It's huge. Right.
I think it speaks to the whole system, which has it's got so many factors in it that just don't work. And so the step change of some new models of how we're structuring funding and financing are just so vital. Just absolutely critical. And so and whether it's government taking action or whether we're taking action as a collective of Hawke's Bay. I mean, some of our investment policy around 3 waters we did before there was a government 3 waters thing on the table, which was a huge amount of catch up and a huge amount of current issues to even get capacity for continuing level of service, let alone growth, that actually we had to use debt. So 7 years ago, we had $2 million worth of external debt, and now we're at 44. So this council's taken a really deliberate approach when it comes to the investment that we need to catch up on. So we've, set some of those principles quite a number of years ago.
Yeah, well, the high order priority we actually have quality water.
Exactly.
So we do that.
Yeah. My question on this report is actually about, so the 3-year plan flags an additional $16.5 million worth of debt in this current financial year. Sort of how are you setting yourself up for that in your treasury functions to be ready for that? Is there anything you're concerned about and that we need to think about now early in the financial year?
So currently I don't have any concerns in the next short window. Obviously, once you start getting out towards the beginning of the next three-year plan. We will be getting close to our debt ceilings as they are structured at the moment. So for the two new members, we've got a treasury policy that caps our maximum debt at 150% of revenue, unless we go and get a credit rating, in which case I'm just trying to remember what the number was. I think it was 200 or 200. So that gives us enough debt room to carry on delivering this debt profile that you've got in front of you. But obviously, before we go into the next LTP process, we will, assuming that Hawke's Bay Water hasn't happened, we will need to consider getting a credit rating at that point. And just for some breaking news, 9 o'clock this morning, there was some media releases from Cabinet about water funding. So the LGFA and Cabinet sent out a joint press release saying that the debt to income ratio for any new water entities being set up will be capped at 500%. So that gives a lot more debt headroom for these entities to bring New Zealand's waters up to standard. Obviously, that is then tempered by your ability to actually service and repay that.
Sorry, has that been agreed with the rating agencies, has it?
Yep.
This morning.
The rating agencies have agreed it, not the government.
No, government and LGFA is how it reads.
Oh, okay. LGFA's in there, okay. It's good.
So that gives a bit more scope for these water entities as they are considered.
Which is going to be the capacity of the sector to actually put the pipes in the ground and fix them. So,
Some of them, agreed. But I think we need to think about that in a short-term view, not just a long-term view, because even just that question I asked then about the $16.5 million worth of debt potentially we're going to take on in the next 12 months, this current year, that, you know, what's our likelihood of actually delivering all of that? And so, you know, it might say it in the budget and then we've got a project program that we want to get to that, but actually, are we going to get there? What's the likelihood? We have had quite a good delivery on CapEx percentage in the last few years, but actually coming out of cyclone recovery and all that, are we going to hit that again? You know, we've got some things to manage in that, I think.
yeah, well, it goes back to engaging with our contractors and looking at the capacity and all that sort of stuff. And they'll be sitting there thinking, well, there's all this money coming out. How do we, what game are they going to play in terms of who gets priority? They're going to chase the margins, aren't they? Easy jobs. And
probably just, sounds like a lot of money, but it's still not the full capital program that it would have been otherwise 3 years ago. But the big focus though is really around how we're programming to something like things we've discussed this morning around maximising value out of the investment, step change in contract management, the step change in procurement management, and particularly the step change in project management that we've done a lot of stuff we've done a lot in the past. But now this next phase is going to be about programming and programming well and making best use of that. I'm not saying we haven't done that in the past, but that's got to be coming back to our 3-year plans, deliberate in our most key urgent priorities, and that's where we've got to continue to focus our attention.
and do our contractors read and digest and start planning on that basis? Because that's all public information, right? So they'll be sitting back and saying, well, Central Hawke's Bay District Council has been a customer of ours for years. So what are they doing in terms of gearing up? Without them.
Yeah, Mr. Chair, just on that point, we're looking to establish a regular kind of formal catch up with our suppliers as a kind of market engagement exercise, so they can see the pipeline coming, and hopefully that drives better efficiencies, but also maximises the opportunity for our suppliers to tender, so we get that that competitive market and maintain that competitive market. So I think visibility and transparency, I think, is key for where we need to go. Even if we haven't got that guaranteed funding, they can see it coming and we can update them on a regular basis so it's more predictable.
My main concern on all of this is we're comfortable now and with our debt to revenue ratio quite low, we're expecting some quite some big increases in debt going forward. We know that the forms of the change to Three Waters is coming. We have the pressure of wanting to start these projects because they really need to be done. I just worry how long it takes to get all this done, particularly the water. I know Hawke's Bay have been talking about it for quite some time, and I don't know how far they are down in the pipeline, but I just worry that we might be in breach of our policy limits. And we've got 150 there. We could go to 175. That's where the LGFA will let us. And then you see you go to credit rating, you go to 200. I just wanted to get some comfort that we're okay and we're not going to be in a breach situation, because now's the time to plan for that, not when you get there, because then it's a bit hard. So, and it's getting all those ducks lined up, and just getting that comfort that that's really under control. And some of it's not your control because you're dealing with a whole lot of other entities that are trying to make up their mind. So yeah, I'm just trying to raise that as an issue well in advance, and I'm sure it's on your minds as well. But yeah,
So maybe just to give some reassurance, we've actually done some work on that. So that's included updates to the treasury management policy and the financial strategy as well. So we'll touch on that later in a bit more detail if you want. But it's even exploring things like shadow credit ratings, and actually can we even get a credit rating? So there's a lot of that work that we've done as preparatory stuff as part of the development of the 3-year plan as well, because it was a really key assumption. So happy to have that conversation now or in a bit more detail offline about some of the work we've done in that space as well.
I think that was a useful conversation to have, because even some of the decisions that we've made about where to invest in the CapEx programs, about how to be really focused, is that you go, well, actually this might take a bit longer to get up and running than we think. So let's not get too overzealous. Let's not get too overzealous. But then we get to the point where actually the key urgent things are things like replacing a reservoir, which immediately have got a really big price tag. They're not something you can spread. And so that's some of the tricky stuff that we've got in the managing of that CapEx program.
it's not easy, but now's the time when you've got plenty of runway ahead of you.
Yeah.
Rather than to be at the end, and we need to.
And I think the other one is, if you look at the metric and the policy on page 46 that talks about finance costs as a proportion of total rates revenue, and the limit in the policy is less than 25%. The reality is we're sitting at 7%, and that's probably too much in terms of impact on the ratepayers. So we've got some pretty gnarly things to work through.
Just one other question, sorry, it's just come to me. With this Treasury report, there doesn't seem to be any reporting budget versus actual expenses, interest costs and those sorts of things. You'll probably tell me it's in your finance and other committee. But I just wondered if it was something that you would consider putting in here, because to me it's part of your Treasury report.
We can certainly add it. It's not secret information, and it is in the reports that go to council in terms of the quarterly financials. But I can add that in.
It's just in terms of your performance. Are you being within budget? Are you with your investments? Are you collecting the revenue that you thought you're going to collect? It's just a matter of monitoring it more than anything else. You've done it good.
Perhaps there's something we can do to make sure there's some deliberate reports that might get reported somewhere else, but make sure they come to you at the time, so it's not not separated.
Any other questions? Okay, the recommendation is to note the report. Election.
I'll move.
Thank you. Righty-ho. Audit charter. Back again.
Yes. Yep, you'll be seeing lots of me this morning. So this report is just a little bit of an update on internal audit. So council has a small budget for internal audit. So this is where we get an external party to come and look at and to provide some assurance on management's controls to protect its financially and its assets, our risk settings, and our governance oversight of those risks. So as part of setting our forward program of internal audit, it's best practice to have a internal audit charter. And that sets out what the responsibility of the audit is, what the purpose of it is, what authority it's got, and so on. So what we've presented here in front of you today is a draft charter, and we propose that, subject to your opinions on it, that we adopt that and use that as the basis for setting our forward program for internal audit for the rest of the triennium. Happy to receive feedback on the charter.
Councillor Monahan, you got a question?
Yes, thank you, Chair. I just see in the report that there's a small budget for internal audit of 17,500. Question is this amount sufficient to undertake internal audits after this council has implemented this charter? And will there be any additional costs involved?
So the 17,500 is reflective of the budgets that we've had in previous years. This allows us to do 2 small audits for 1 larger audit per annum. This is probably on the light side if you compare us to some of the bigger councils that do 3 audits a year. But obviously we are fiscally constrained. So happy to take advice on whether we should be changing that in the next annual plan. But yeah, that's
Through Mr. Chair, ultimately, the charter's the first key step. We build what is from this kind of the logical next steps that we go through, assess what the risks are, associated risks are, and look, it may well be that there's recommendations from this committee back to council that say, council, your budget's insufficient. We've identified this risk, and this risk, and we think actually this is an appropriate budget for a 3-year internal audit plan. Love the risk and assurance committee. Again, it's, you've done your duty, you've passed that to council for their consideration, ultimately the council's decision then as to what to do. So just something to think about as well as we progress. Again, certainly the charter's a lift in maturity from not having had anything. So
I can't see the point of the charter. I've read it. I can't see any risk from us having this document, but I also can't see the benefit. Why do we need the charter and what's its purpose?
We've been operating quite happily without one. However, it is best practice and a recommendation from the Auditor General that we have one. So
it's a requirement of the auditing standards.
Yeah, okay. I just, how's it relevant to us? Because it doesn't even talk about, where will the priorities be set? What are the principles in which we will prioritise? Is it that we'll have a rotating across sensitive expenditures kind of program? Is it that we'll take current strategic focus as the area that we put internal audit into? Like, it's just very open. So I'm guessing what that means is that we approve this document, which doesn't really say anything except ticking the auditor's book. And then at the next committee meeting, we actually then talk about how we're going to prioritise what we internally audit. So it doesn't actually add any bones to helping us figure out what we're going to internally audit. It's just kind of a piece of paper. And we just do the work after that anyway. I'm being really cynical here, but it's
So
there's nothing in here that says CHBDC. It just says
what it's at least doing is providing the start of a framework for how you do internal. It's not
Sure.
perfect, I get it.
Yeah.
But in terms of that maturity spectrum, it's something we've never had before. So I think there's an opportunity around, like, even do you leave it on the table as draft? Do we have a go working through and workshop for the next one, actually what the internal audit program is? You could have some reflection on you don't have to adopt it today. You can have some reflection on that in terms of how we build the work program. If there are changes that you want to make to try and right size it, then happy to do that as well. So when you sort of think about, it's again, a framework about outlining what the responsibilities of internal audit are, about being proactive and forward thinking, designing and executing audit plans like us. Yeah, just how far do you want to go with this?
I sort of take a contrary view to you. I actually think this is a very rudimentary internal audit charter, but it is probably fit for purpose in that we do very, very few audits, and we don't want a sledgehammer for an ant type approach. For me, the most important thing in here is the audits will be risk-based audits. So when you're looking forward and setting the program, it's based around risk. That seems to be, to me, the most important thing. In bigger organisations, they tend to have routine audits where just there's a certain cycle of things go through a routine audit. Whereas when you're real short, when you're only focused like we are here, then we just focus on the things that are really important. You as management see, well, we're having some issues over there. We've got a comment from Audit New Zealand. We're not doing things here. We can check that. So yeah, I do support it. And I think this charter is pretty small, and I think it's fit for purpose. Also, I concur with you that is best practice. So I support it.
So I like what you just said about the adopt a risk-based audit approach is the most important part of it.
For me, yeah.
Yeah, and I like that because that kind of comes then back to, well, where to next with it, just from that bullet point. So that speaks to me about where its usefulness comes in. So that's really helpful, but it's kind of buried, in there. But if that's the key thing, like that's really helpful to understand what its value is.
Once again, I think it's useful to have something. I think it could be personalised a little bit better in terms of acknowledging who we are and bits and pieces. And we made some calls. The scope is pretty broad. We made a call, made another call that management would be engaged in setting the terms of reference, those sorts of things, and you're putting the risk-based stuff. I think it's purple. But I think it was this question I had was, you do other reviews already within the organisation, like you're reviewing health and safety processes. You've already mentioned that you're reviewing external contractors, health and safety programs, and I presume you're doing some efficiency and effectiveness, value for money type reviews already on compliance with those contracts. And I could probably, and there might be other things that you do inside the organisation where you're double checking on stuff, which you do in the normal business. People sometimes those activities are really important in terms of the findings, and so giving light and transparency to those as part of this wider program. It can still be done under the Health and Safety system, but that is a review. So it's just making sure that, for example, with your contractors, that either they are explicitly outside of this mandate and they're done through another process, or we bring them through into here, and it's just part of the wider, day-to-day checks and balances you're doing. I think is something that we should think about. And finally, the other thing, you've got a comment around the relationship with the external auditor. Obviously, external auditors always love to review internal audit reports as well, particularly around value for money and large spend with our contracts and bits and pieces. And I think in the last health and safety, last audit risk meeting, so I listened to it last night on video, the partner mentioned that he'll be looking at those contractual arrangements and procurements and stuff. And if we've already done a review around those, we can share them. So it's just acknowledging those in here. So in principle, I agree, having a charter, you've already got some stuff in here, but I think I agree with the mayor. Let's make it ours a little bit. And maybe the process from here is to make those little amendments, hold it as draft. Let's do the next level of activity and then just repurpose it, just reflect back on this and make sure this framework stands to support the things we really want to do. The final comment I would make is, and I agree with you, Chief Executive, is that once we've got a risk-based approach, then I think in terms of the budget, we should then build that from the bottom up. I know council give us direction saying roughly you've got about that much to play with, and therefore we'll shape our audit and risk program around what we report. But equally, as a committee, we should be saying, cool, guys, we really need some work here. Can council, can you fund a couple of pieces of work for us? We believe that'll provide value for you going forward. So I think that there should be that natural tension going on in the budgeting process. So we should set as part of our audit program, even before you decide on your budgets, that we put a paper up to council saying, well, here's our proposed audit program for the year. Here's the must-haves and here's the nice-to-haves, and then allow the elected members to decide. With support from this one. Yeah. It would.
Yeah.
Oh, well, yes, councillor Flanagan.
Yes, I agree with you, because I don't want to see this as just a tick the box exercise. And we'll just do an audit because of the sake of an audit. And I remember Councillor Aikens very particular on what we spend on these audits. So for me, if I can see benefit from what we get out of it, yes, I'll support it.
Could we also just, so I like that idea of take this, do the next step, and then use that to kind of rationalise back and make sure we've covered the right bits in the charter. I like that idea. I like that idea. Part of where we've, I think, been challenged by internal audit stuff in the past has been the actual operationalising of the recommendations that come out of them. And so we've kind of had two approaches in the last half a dozen years. There was one early approach, which was very much aligned with where the direction of the committee said, do an internal audit on contract management. That's the biggest issue, which is the holder of our success. And then we've taken, and then actually the findings of that at a high level in terms of review this document, tick off this thing, that kind of happened. But then the actual operationalising of that into actually changing behaviour in the organisation didn't necessarily happen. The second kind of way of looking at internal audit was more directed by the chief executive, which was in that kind of compliance audit, sensitive expenditure kind of stuff. That how do we translate the results of this into operationalised value and making sure we get that reporting and that's right is really important as well.
And you're right, and I see we've got a chair, and so they might not be the right people to do some of the stuff as well.
Yeah.
And you're 100% right, Mayor. We need to be very clear that the outcome we're looking for, which these ports is implementable and can actually provide the value back. And so they almost want to quantify the value of that change, and often those audit reports lack that transparency around how do we, you're the experts, you're telling us a change, give us some insights about how we impact that of value. And that's where engagement with management and saying, well, actually, in our particular situation, that recommendations are practical. And it's ensuring management are involved in those later parts of those processes.
And probably just how do you transfer the value? So just with contract management as an example, if we're doing an audit of the contract management, we've got work to do in contract management, so we're better off spending the time doing the review of what we already know is actually, or do we spend that same organisational effort and expenditure on actually improving the process? And then having done that in a year's time, then having done an audit to say, well, actually, or a review of the function to say, actually, yep, we said we were going to do X, Y, and Z, we're on track, but we've still got X to do. So I think there's some of that maturity that we need to have as well around, not just looking at a list of internal audit issues, but if the FBT audit was a great audit 2 years ago, but actually did it really add the value?
Right. No. Any other observations or questions around that? It's great feedback. So thanks very much for the work you've done on that. It's I think it's
So happy to leave that one on the table if you want to, Mr. Chair, and
I'll leave it on the table.
Yeah,
But I think the work you've done has been, is rewarding. We've got suggestions going through. Let's do the next steps for the next meeting.
so we'll do some work. So just on next steps, we'll do some work as ELT as well. Based on our risk conversation a little bit later, what some of the other risks are that we're seeing, and we'll aim to bring that into kind of a workshop paper.
The principle of having an internal program is a good thing. So thank you very much, Brent.
But, Mr. Chair, perhaps the recommendation suggested is that we adopt it. Perhaps we should endorse the direction that it's heading in rather than adopting it. And that way it just sort of is in the works cycle and we'll come back.
So just switch out the word adopts with endorses the direction of the.
So in fact, it was actually option 3 in paper.
Potentially, yeah.
Okay, so we've got a mover and seconder for that.
Yeah.
Right.
Thinks we have so much to say about it, Mike.
Okay, right, the insurance review. An update on the insurance replacement options.
So this paper is just basically a update on council's insurances. We've got a more fuller discussion scheduled for later in the meeting and workshop. We've got Wim Palmer sitting here behind you, who is going to be helping me lead that discussion. But I thought I'd just update you on a couple of pertinent points in terms of the program and where it's at the moment. So at the last risk and assurance meeting, I brought to your attention that we had a little bit of an issue with the renewal of our liability and indemnity insurances, and that our broker at the time was indicating that they were pulling out of the market for New Zealand councils and that they weren't going to renew our policy. So this is just a bit of an update to say that we have managed to secure some cover. The cover is significantly less robust than the previous cover in terms of the caps and limits that have been placed on it, and the fact that it's shared with multiple other councils. And Jim and I will take you through some slides later in the workshop, give a bit more detail on that. The other process that's going on is the commencement of our renewal of our above ground and below ground asset renewal. Officially, the policy doesn't renew until the 1st of November. However, there's quite a lead time with those renewals, and Aon are about to head off to London, if they're not there already, to discuss with the underwriters over in London the level of cover that they need for New Zealand councils. And so as part of that, we've been providing some indicative numbers already. We've had valuations undertaken for insurance purposes for our buildings, and I have just received a day or so back our first draft of our Three Waters valuations. And in fact, I had a meeting with Stantec yesterday to discuss some of my questions around that, and hopefully by next week we'll get a revised version of that. But so far, as I say, I had to provide some indicative numbers. So the building ones are that are shown in the table there on 57, page 57, are based on the valuation. The Three Waters currently are just based on a percentage uplift, and they'll be replaced with the actuals once they're finalised. But just sort of letting you know the process and where we're at, and we'll discuss insurance more fuller later in the meeting.
Much. Any questions? Want to discuss?
Just a question around Marsh. Did they not come back with some other liability insurance, or they just walk away and say, no, sorry, we can't find anybody?
Just to give a bit of context, 5 years ago now, maybe 4 years ago, the Hawke's Bay councils did a review of our insurance brokers, and at that stage it was decided that all our above ground and underground insurance would be moved to Aon. At the time, the quotes that we were getting from Marsh for liability insurances compared to what we were getting from Aon were quite different, and this particular council decided to stay with Marsh. When things got difficult and London their underwriters, I'm not sure whether they're London or Australian, decided that they were nervous about the New Zealand market, particularly in light of the leaky building claims that have been going through the courts. They withdrew from the market. Marsh was able to find enough cover to cover the councils that had both above ground material damage and liability insurance, but basically walked away from those that only had the liability insurance, which was us and these 17 other councils. Yeah, so we had a month's notice that they were withdrawing.
Motions.
We've got some more.
We've got a conversation coming later on, so, but thank you very much for that. So once again, recommendation is to note the report. Wait a second. First renewal. Elected members' expenses. 1 May 30 June 24.
This will be the last time in this formal meeting that you'll be hearing from me, thankfully. So this is just a transparency report that we do for every risk and insurance. It just gives the public a bit of an understanding as to what council is spending on behalf of their councillors in terms of travel costs, training, conferences, etc. And this only covers a very short period. It covers the period of May and June. There wasn't actually that much activity in that period. So I'll just table this report, and it's really more for the public's information than any action required.
Any questions? Usually budget for these, so we got the year-to-date numbers, so that's the annual numbers for 30 June. We provide a budget, so
Yes, we do. So again, for transparency, I can add the budget in there, and then you can see how we're going against budget.
yeah, no, I think it's important that we budget those things.
Sure.
I mean, again, main purpose of it's just transparency. What the councils choose not to do this, so.
No, I think it's good principle. If there's not any other questions, we will I will give them this one. But the elected members' expenses for May 2024 be noted. Second, thank you. So thank you. One hand. Great. Righty ho. We now have the next date for the meeting is
We might just leave that, Mr. Chair, because I think we're going to have to move that to October date. I think we might have to move that one.
Okay.
Due to availability, so we'll just leave it.
Okay, we'll come back to you with
To confirm that. Yep.
if we want. So we now move to the public excluded process, right? So to notify that the following key items will be discussed in the public excluded business, emerging risks and issues forum discussion. Reasons for moving into this forum is to have a free and frank discussion of expression of opinions by or between or two members, officers or employees of the local authorities. And secondly, the withholding of the information is necessary to maintain effective conduct of public affairs through the protection of the health of members, officers, employees and persons from health or harassment. Chair, thanks. Thank you all for watching online. I'm notifying that now we're going to stop the live streaming. And may I have a move and a second to move into this forum? Yeah, that's the one. Thank you very much. And thank you, public. Hearings in the session.